The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. The Third Barrel. At 16, the weight of inheritance pressed heavy on both boys, though each bore it differently. Uriel carried it in silence, in the furrows of his brow, in the way he touched books, and earth as though listening for voices too faint for others to hear. Samuel carried it in restlessness, in strength unspent, in questions that refused to stay buried. One evening, as they lingered in the cellar where the air hung cool and heavy with oak and dust, Samuel planted himself before the third barrel. Its wood was darker than the others, the seal more firmly pressed, the iron hoops rusted but unbroken. It seemed less a vessel and more a witness. "If it's mine," Samuel said at last, voice sharp with a challenge he didn't fully mean, "shouldn't I know what's inside?" Uriel's lantern light flickered across his face, setting his eyes aglow with something between patience and fire. He shook his head. "Not yet. Zuriel sealed it for a time he foresaw. It isn't just a cask of wine, Samuel. It's a covenant." Samuel kicked at the dirt floor, sending up a puff of dust that sparkled briefly in the lantern's glow before vanishing. "A covenant I didn't ask for," he muttered. Uriel's gaze did not waver. He let the silence draw long enough that Samuel finally looked up. "Neither did I," Uriel said, his tone quiet, but the kind of quiet that leaves no room for mockery. "But your Tiro's blood. Zuriel trusted that blood. So do I." The words struck deeper than Samuel let on. He turned away, pretending to study the stonework, but inside something shifted, like a door he hadn't realized was locked. Later that night, they sat beneath the wide arc of stars. The fire between them hissed as sap bled from the wood, and Samuel, for once subdued, whispered into the flames, "Sometimes I think Zuriel knew more about me than I do." Uriel lifted his eyes from the coals to the sky, where constellations arched like inscriptions only prophets could read. He nodded slowly. He did. He knew Liora would be hidden, that Eva and Frederick would try to shield her from the prophecy, and because of that, he left you the shield's echo, the third barrel. He made preparations for every variation of fate. The words settled into Samuel's chest with the weight of stone dropped into water. Ripples spread inward. For the first time, he did not answer with laughter or defiance. He only listened to the fire's soft crackle, and the silence between the flames and the stars became his answer. And for the first time, he did not laugh prophecy away. Dream of Zuriel. Uriel's dreams grew sharper with age, as though his very sleep had been drafted into the covenant. At 17, one dream shook him from slumber so violently that he rose with a shout, heart hammering, sweat chilling his skin. He stumbled into the chapel, where moonlight poured through narrow windows like cold fire, and fell to his knees. The vision lingered, not as haze but as clarity too sharp to bear. Zuriel stood before him, not the weary patriarch laid in the earth, but younger, eyes bright as iron struck hot, shoulders still carrying the posture of command. He spoke, but not to Uriel. His words were addressed to another shadow at his side. Tiro, ancestor, warrior, brother across time. "3 barrels," Zuriel said, and his voice echoed like a psalm carved into stone. "One for kingship, one for covenant, one for shield. Because the girl will be hidden, but she will return. And when she does, the shield must already be ready." Uriel gasped awake on the cold chapel floor. His breath came ragged, his palms pressed against the flagstones as though steadying himself from falling. He turned, and in the pale silver of moonlight saw Samuel lying nearby, asleep in the loft where they sometimes kept vigil after long nights of study. His face lit faintly by the moon, seemed carved from the very prophecy Zuriel had spoken. Strong, unknowing, necessary. Uriel whispered, so softly it was almost a prayer. He knew she would be hidden, and he gave me you. The words hung in the chapel like incense, and though Samuel slept on, somewhere in his dreaming heart he stirred, as if the covenant had already reached him in silence. Light and laughter. Though prophecy pressed upon them like a shadow that lengthened each year, youth refused to yield entirely. Even sons of covenant still carried the quickness of blood, the hunger of limbs unspent. On afternoons when the harvest was done and Frederick's eye turned elsewhere, Uri'el and Samuel joined the workers' sons in the wide fields. They played football with bare feet pounding the dust, shirts stained with sweat and grass. Uriel, wiry and sharp, darted like a hawk between slower boys, while Samuel, all strength and laughter, barreled through with a shout that echoed across the valley. The laborers on the terraces cheered and cursed as if it were battle, not play. And in those hours, the burden of bloodlines loosened its grip. Other days, they raced horses along the valley's edge, where the vineyards gave way to open ground. Hooves struck sparks on stone, wind lashed their hair back, and the world was nothing but breath and speed. Samuel always pushed the pace, daring Uriel to match him, while Uriel leaned forward, eyes narrowed, calculating every stride as if the race were a puzzle written into the earth. Once daring went further. They stole suits from the cedar chest, Frederick's forgotten gifts, too fine for vineyard sons, and slipped into Cape Town as gentlemen. They walked the boulevards with forced dignity, purchased bread rolls with coin Samuel had lifted from a drawer, and bowed gravely to passing ladies who looked on them with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. For a few hours, they were no longer heirs to hidden barrels and forgotten wars, but simply young men striding through a city that seemed to belong to them. Frederick caught them before sundown, thunder rolling in his voice as he drove them into the courtyard. His fury was measured, but his words struck like iron on anvil. He named them foolish, reckless, unworthy of the trust that had been handed down. Uriel bowed his head and held his silence, but Samuel, once the door was closed, lifted his arms and mimicked every gesture, every cadence of their father's speech. He deepened his voice, furrowed his brows, shook a finger with exaggerated severity. Uriel resisted at first, then broke into helpless laughter until he collapsed onto the floor, clutching his ribs. In those moments, Samuel was not only his friend, but his balanced laughter to Uriel's silence, warmth to his shadow. The vineyard knew both day and night. So too did Uriel. Without Samuel, he feared he might never have remembered the day, preparing to leave. By 18, they were men in all but name. Uriel's frame was lean, stripped of excess, eyes carved by study and by visions that made him seem older than the years written on his skin. Samuel had grown broad-shouldered, confident, his grin edged with danger like a blade that gleamed even at rest. The letter still waited. Otto Kappel's reply, unadorned but undeniable. Budapest, Newgati Station, autumn equinox, a place, a time, a summons older than their choice. They had spoken of it in fragments over months, but now, as the vines bent heavy with fruit, and summer waned toward autumn, both knew the season of waiting was at its end. One evening, they descended into the cellar where the barrels slept in silence. The air was cool, touched with oak and the faint musk of age. Uriel placed his hand upon the third barrel, the one they had spoken of, fought over, dreamed around. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "When the gate opens," he said, "I will step through, but not alone. You are the third player. Zuriel chose you." I remember it through him, through my blood. Samuel stood a long moment, gazing at the barrel as though it were a mirror, as though it might reveal what he had not yet seen in himself. Then, with a solemnity uncharacteristic of him, he laid his hand beside Uriel's. Then let's see if the old man was right. The cellar seemed to breathe at that, as if dust and stone and oak all bore witness. 2 hands on ancient wood, 2 lives aligned, and above them the equinox crept nearer, like a gate already half ajar. Farewell. Dawn came hushed, the valley wrapped in a pale mist that clung to vine and stone as though reluctant to let them go. The air smelled of dew and fermenting grapes, harvest's perfume sweet, heavy and fleeting. Uriel climbed into the back of a freight truck, its bed stacked with barrels of pinotage bound for the Cape. The wood was damp with morning condensation, the hoops gleaming faintly in the first light. He settled among them, hand tracing the rough staves as though greeting kin. Samuel followed, swinging up with ease, satchel slung across his knees, grin bright enough to mask the tremor in his hands. "You're sure about this?" Samuel asked, voice pitched low so the driver wouldn't hear. Uriel's eyes fixed on the horizon, where the mist thinned into a promise of distance. "The first Uriel is the gate," he said. "If I find him, I find the key. And if I find the key—" His voice tightened, carrying more certainty than youth should have held. "We'll know what Zuriel meant." The engine coughed to life. The truck jolted forward, rattling over the gravel path that led down through the vineyard rows. Leaves brushed the wooden slats as though bidding them goodbye. From the estate house, Evea stood at the veranda, her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. Her eyes followed the truck until it blurred with the mist, though her hands never left her sides, clenched white in the fabric. At her sleeve tugged Liora, her braid loose, her face burning with protest. "Why can't I go too?" the girl demanded, her voice sharp with the stubbornness Evea knew too well. Evea knelt, gathering her daughter's hands into her own, though her own voice wavered under the weight of something greater than maternal caution. It was fate she spoke with, not choice. "You will not follow the Brotherhood," she whispered, trembling. "You will not follow the prophecy. Promise me, Liora." But the girl did not answer. She only turned her gaze eastward, past the mist, past the vineyards, past the freight truck already vanishing into morning. Her eyes fixed on the same horizon her brother had claimed as his own. And in that silence, Evea felt her heart break, for she knew promise and prophecy could not be bound in the same hand. The valley held its breath as the truck disappeared, carrying sons toward gates unseen and leaving behind a girl whose silence was already a vow.